Continuing on in Revelation chapter 13, we made it through the first two verses last week, and we'll just pick it up and start reading with verse 1. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his head a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. So as we looked at this last week, we saw this beast rising out of the sea, who is the Antichrist, not to be confused with the beast we will see in verse 11, rising out of the earth, which is the false prophet, and he's not to be confused with the dragon, which is Satan. But in those three, we see essentially the unholy trinity, a counterfeit trinity, as it were. Now, we looked last week at the kingdom of the Antichrist. We talked about the revived Roman Empire. One of the things I had mentioned last week was the WEU, the Western European Union, and the territories that they occupied. The WEU is actually now defunct, but there seems to be some question as to whether or not they're really disbanded. So that's just something to keep in mind as you do some of your research if you look into the WEU a lot. With that, let's just continue on and read the rest of this section, starting in verse 3. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon, who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" And he was given a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against the Lord, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life, and the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with a sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. So as we roll back here to verse 3, we start taking a look then at the Antichrist. Now, probably one of the favorite pastimes of Christians who believe that prophecy is yet to be fulfilled is trying to figure out who the Antichrist is. Now, I just want to preface the rest of this study with this statement, and that is, it is much more important than we be looking for Jesus Christ than the Antichrist. So as we look at these things, let's not get too hung up on all this stuff. Now, one of the things that we see here, we start to see some characteristics of him. And in verse 3 it says, "And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded." Now, that is one of those things that tends to promote a lot of speculation. Some have, because of that, some of the theories, there's a jillion theories on who the Antichrist is out there. Years ago, it's lost a lot of popularity, obviously now, is Ronald Reagan, since he has since passed away. Besides, he is a believer from what I understand. Now, there's some that say that from his name occurring in a hidden manner in the Bible code, Barack Obama. There are, according to the number of his name, some have said Prince Charles, some have also said Nero. And I think what tends to happen is as we see somebody that maybe we don't agree with all their views, and we start wanting to make that person the Antichrist. And I think that's how a lot of these theories start in the first place. But here's what we see is that all the world will marvel and fall after the beast as a result of this being recovering from this mortal head wound. Now, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is some of the prophecies concerning the Antichrist may have been fulfilled already, if he is alive today. It is very possible that he is alive and in power somewhere today. So this is one of those things that as we look at this, we tend to look at a yet future event and we say, okay, well, if we believe that the rapture is imminent, after the rapture, will he suddenly rise to power? No, he's probably already going to be in power at that point. So there is a good chance that he is on this earth today, but maybe not revealing himself as the Antichrist. I don't believe he will be revealed as the Antichrist until after the rapture, but that's just my personal opinion. Now, but one of the things that we'll see about him is that he worships the dragon. He is a Satan worshiper. Now, that doesn't mean he goes to belongs to the Satanic Church or anything like that, because in order to worship Satan, all you have to do is really not believe in God, because either you're for him or against him. That's all there is to it. Let's see, according to verse 5, and he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. Now, we looked at some of this last week, where we saw some of this in Daniel chapter 7, when we saw the little horn. And we see that he has now been given a blasphemous mouth to go with his blasphemous name. He's given authority for 42 months, where it says to continue, essentially to make war. His hand is against the saints and his mouth is against the God of heaven. So as we look at him and we look at his tenure, it's going to be a very difficult time to follow Christ. Now, if some of you guys follow the Voice of the Martyrs, Far-Reaching Ministries, Gospel for Asia, or some of the other missions organizations, you understand that it is very difficult right now in some countries to be a follower of Christ. Well, this is going to be worldwide, and it will be a persecution like is not even known in the Sudan. He's going to blaspheme against God. And he will deny the God of heaven and his Christ. I think this is the person that generally we would call an atheist. He does not have any particular belief in God. One of the interesting things that we're starting to see take place in our national politics as well as world politics is it is becoming very unpopular to have any belief in God, because that's the only way you can be tolerant of all world religions, really, when it comes right down to it, because otherwise you're picking a place. He's going to lift himself up, though, to be worshipped as God. When we see what's really in his heart, it's not about worshiping, not wanting to worship anybody. He wants himself to be worshipped, and that's the Antichrist. His name, we should contrast that with our God, the God of heaven and the God of earth. The Jews held his name in such high esteem, Yahweh, that they would only say his name once a year. And so the Lord's name is holy, but here this Antichrist is going to lift up his own name. He's going to throw the name of the Lord around carelessly, use it in vain, speak against the name above all names. And then we're going to see his tabernacle, or his place of habitation. We see the Lord where his tabernacle is. It's a place where he dwells. Now, as we look at this, it's talking about in the end of verse 6 here, and those who dwell in heaven. Now think about who this is talking about as we've been through Revelation to this point. It's the living creatures around the throne. It's the angels, the 24 elders, the martyrs, the saints of old, and I believe you and me, the church, because that's where we will be at this particular time, is in heaven after the rapture. Verse 7, it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life, of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. So it was granted to him to make war with the saints. Now keep in mind that this is not an antichrist who is under no authority whatsoever. It had to be granted to him. God is still in control even in this time. And any authority that the Antichrist is allowed to have, God is allowed, because all he has to do is breathe one breath to stop it. You know, Daniel chapter 7:21 says, I was watching, and the same horn was making war with the saints and prevailing against them. Now, as we look at this, the church is already raptured at this point. And in fact, when we look at verse 8 here, it says, all who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. See, the church is already raptured at this point. And one of the things that we are going to see is in this verse 9, it says, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. We're going to see that it's a familiar phrase to us if we've been through Revelation, but it leaves out what the Spirit is saying to the churches, because the church, I believe, is already in heaven. Now, let's just pick it up at verse 9. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here's the patience and the faith of the saints. Now, those he's making war with, if the church is out of the way, are those who have given their lives to Christ during the tribulation and survived to this point. Many will be beheaded for their faith. So this is going to be essentially the tribulation saints, is who this is that he is going to make war with. Now, one of the things to keep in mind with this is that if you know Jesus, we don't go through the tribulation. He is preserving us from that day. If you haven't given your life to Jesus Christ, you really might want to think about it today, because we don't know when the Lord is returning, and he could return at any time. And the question you have to ask yourself is, are you ready to go through that? And my thoughts are that if you are not ready to live for Christ today, you won't be ready to die for him in that time period. It's much better to give your life to him today, surrender to him, and turn your life to him, and live for him today. Now, one of the things that we're going to see, though, is that all who dwell on the earth have continued to reject Christ and are going to worship this Antichrist. He will be worshipped. Now, this leading into captivity that we see in verse 10, this is talking about, essentially taking captives, killing with the sword, and here is the patience of the saints. The word there, hupomone, in the Greek is perseverance, the patience of the saints, or perseverance. And basically, he's saying, here it is, here's what it's going to take to persevere at this time. You may go into captivity, or you may go to death. Now, as we look at this, probably one of the big questions that comes up now for many of us, and we have fun speculating with, as we mentioned earlier, is who is the Antichrist? Well, Daniel chapter 7, verse 8, and chapter 8, verse 9 refer to him as the little horn. Now, we know because of what we have seen previously that these horns represent a king or some kind of political leader. Daniel chapter 8, verse 23 calls him a king of fierce countenance. Daniel chapter 9, verse 26 refers to him as the prince who is to come. Daniel chapter 11, verse 36, we see him as the self-willed king. He will do his own will. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we see him as the man of sin, the son of perdition, and as the wicked one. John verse 2, verse 18 calls him the Antichrist. And then, of course, Revelation 13, verse 1, we see him as the beast that comes out of the sea. So these are some of the specific things that the Bible calls this man the Antichrist. Now, here are some of the specific prophecies concerning the Antichrist, and these are the things where you start to look and say, okay, well, this kind of, it gets more specific and it starts narrowing things down. Just as with Jesus, if we to look at the prophecies, the number of prophecies concerning him and concerning his coming, it ends up narrowing it down beyond a statistical possibility of any variance to Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone, because he was the only one that could fulfill all those prophecies statistically. And in fact, even violates statistical prophecy, because it can only go so far, and the odds are astronomical that he could fulfill all of those things. Now, a guy named John Reynolds did a comparison. He put this out in April 2006. It's called Mr. Europe and 7 Years of Peace in Israel. And he talks about the qualifications of the Antichrist and the 10 horns of the European superstate. Now, as we look at this, keep in mind that the WEU has disbanded. They've sold their assets, but there seems to be this group of countries that still has the responsibility of administering the pensions for the people who look for the WEU. So there is somewhat of an organization still there. So don't underestimate the position of the WEU, or the now defunct WEU, in the future. Now, this Antichrist, he will come from among the 10 kings of a 10-nation beast. We talked about the revived Roman Empire. We also talked last week how the WEU appeared to occupy exactly the same territories that the old Roman Empire did. Now, Daniel chapter 7, verse 24, and Daniel chapter 7, verse 7, as well as Revelation 13:2, talk about where he comes from. Now, according to Daniel chapter 7, verse 8 and verse 24, he will subdue 3 of these kings, because we see this little horn rising up and supplanting 3 kings. We see from Daniel chapter 7, verse 24, that he is different than the other kings. As we looked at the other empires of the past, all of these empires conquered through military might. One of the things that we learn about the Antichrist is that he gains his throne or his place of rule by intrigue. He will rise from obscurity. He's a little horn, Daniel chapter 7, verse 8. As we saw already in Daniel chapter 7 and Revelation 13:5, he's going to speak boastfully or arrogantly. He will blaspheme God, and he will oppress the saints and be successful for 3.5 years. We see this both in Daniel chapter 7 and in Revelation chapter 13. He will try to change the calendar, or perhaps define a new era. We're going to see desires to make a change in the times. We see that according to Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. And he will try to change the laws to perhaps gain an advantage. Now, what political leader has ever done that? I think pretty much all of them. He will not be succeeded by another earthly ruler. His empire will be the last one. He will be succeeded only by Christ at his return, when Christ comes to vanquish him. From Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, we see that he confirms a covenant with the many, including the Jewish people, for 7 years. Now, if you think about the way politics are currently, it is no longer a matter of one nation working with another nation. They're international treaties that now involve a multitude of countries. And one of the things that we are seeing even now taking place in our country that kind of opens our eyes to this is, as we look at certain laws being enacted or certain bans that the American public would never stand still for, we see moves being made to have international laws made and international law being enforced in our country. So this is one of the things that we're starting to see. One of the things that is, I saw a paper that was written and presented to the UN in 1996, and in this paper, one of the things that it had addressed was it contemplated carrying out a military operation by the UN without the aid of the U.S. Army. And it wasn't looking at how do we do this, carving them out. It was couched in such a way, it was examining the possibility as how does the UN or NATO go into the United States and carry out an operation. So, don't be too surprised by this. If you start to see more military activity based from foreign militaries taking place in this country. And anyway, back on topic here. So he's going to confirm this covenant with the many for 7 years. Now, we talked about this a little bit. I believe this very likely is going to be some type of peace treaty. And usually peace treaties don't come out of a time of peace. They come out of a time of war. Now, it would appear that what will happen out of this is a specific part of this covenant is going to involve Israel and some of the rights in Israel. I think it's interesting to note that one of the big things on the agenda for not only the United States but the European Union has been working out the Middle East peace process, and it has just failed miserably over and over and over. They have not been able to resolve peace between the Arab nations and Israel. Now, we see that this Antichrist will put an end to Jewish sacrifice and offerings in the middle of this treaty after 3.5 years, and he will set up an image of himself to be worshipped as God in the temple of God. We see this both in Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, and in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 rather. He does as he pleases, according to Daniel chapter 11, verse 36. He answers to no higher authority. So he is going to essentially have absolute political power. He will show no regard for the religion of his ancestors, according to Daniel chapter 11, verse 37. According to the same verse, he will not believe in any God at all except for himself. And according to the same verse, he will have no regard for the desire of women. He will claim to be greater than any God, according to Daniel chapter 11, verse 37, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4. And also according to 2 Thessalonians 2:4, he's going to claim to be God. His arrival on the world scene will be accompanied by miracles, signs, and wonders, also according to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. He will deny that Jesus is the Messiah, according to 1 John 2:22. According to verse 8 of Revelation 13, he'll be worshipped by many people. And we also saw that in verse 3, he will receive a fatal wound to the head and appear to be healed. We also see that in chapter 17, verse 8. His name will somehow be related to the number 666. According to Revelation 13, verses 17 through 18, we'll get there. Now, he'll be empowered and indwelt by the devil himself, according to Revelation 13:2. Now, there's theories that abound ad nauseum about the identity of who he is. There's Nero, Hitler, Prince Charles, President Obama, many others. I mean, just pick them. About all you got to do is go on the internet and put in who is the Antichrist, and you'll be shocked at what you come up with. But and it's usually just bad scholarship is what it is. I don't think we know, but I'll say this. There seems to be an office that has been set up, and we've seen some power that has been set up that very much resembles some of these things that we have seen. And I would just like to share some of those with you. There is a man, now I'm going to say this, I'm not saying he is the Antichrist, but I think maybe he helped establish the office. His name is Javier Solana. He comes from Spain, which is one of the 10 Western European Union countries. He is a very intelligent guy. He's a Nobel Prize winner. And I just want to ask you this question real quick, and I am going to ask for a show of hands. How many of you have heard of Javier Solana before this? Okay. How many of you heard of Javier Solana before coming to church here? Like 4. Okay. So he has been very much a quiet player in the world government scene. He was at one time, I'll just read you a little bit of his dossier here, if you will. Okay. He was born in Madrid on 14th of July, 1942. He's married. His wife and family live in Spain. He lives in Brussels. He has a doctorate in physics. He's a Fulbright scholar at several American universities. He's a professor of solid-state physics at Madrid Complutense University. He also has studied world economics there. He's the author of well over 30 publications in the field. He's a member of the Spanish chapter of the Club of Rome. He joined the Spanish Socialist Party in 1964. He was himself a Marxist. He became a member of the Spanish Parliament in 1977. He was a Spanish cabinet minister from 1982 to 1995 without any interruption. From December 82 until July of 88, he was the Minister of Culture in Spain simultaneously, and he acted as a government spokesman from July 1985 to July 1988. From July 1988 to July 1992, he was the Minister for Education and Science. From July 1992 to December 1995, he's the Minister of Foreign Affairs. From December 1995 to October 1999, he was the Secretary General of NATO. From October 1899 through December of 2009, he was the Secretary General of the Council of the European Union, High Representative for the Common Foreign and Security Policy. From November 25th of 1999 up through 2009, he was the Secretary General of the now defunct Western European Union. He was a Secretary General of the World Economic Outlook. He is a member of the Bilderbergs Group. He left all these political posts simultaneously in 2009, but he really did not leave the political scene. Currently, he is the president of the Center for Global Economy and Geopolitics out of Barcelona. He is also chairman of the Aspen Institute España, distinguished fellow or senior fellow in foreign policy at Brookings Institute, honorary president of the Center for Human Dialogue in Geneva. He's a member of the board of the International Crisis Group, the European Council on Foreign Relations and Human Rights Watch, as well as senior visiting professor at the London School of Economics, where he was awarded an honorary degree in December of 2010. Previously, he served as the various heads that we've already talked about. So here is a guy who seems to occupy a whole lot of political power. If you had ever been on the State Department's website when they had the Roadmap to Peace posted on there, you would see a picture of Vladimir Putin, Colin Powell, George Bush, is either Ariel Sharon or Benjamin Netanyahu, and one other individual there. That was Javier Solana. He told Ariel Sharon in the Middle East peace process, he says, Mr. Sharon, whether or not you like it, the European Union is part of the Middle East peace process. So he flexes a great deal of muscle. He does not believe in using the military so much as he believes in using the economy to subdue nations. He uses tariffs, embargoes. He's known as Mr. Europe. Now, so he occupies, he bears a lot of some of the characteristics we see, by no means all of them. And again, I just want to reiterate, am I saying Javier Solana is the Antichrist? No, not at all. In fact, one of the things I tried to do was, use one of these calculators that figures out the letters in his name and the number it adds up to. I couldn't get that to add up to 666, no matter what I did. So, so just understand, I'm saying no. It's got to meet all these things. I'm not saying that. But it appears that of the things we mentioned, of these 24 biblical references we looked at, he has or may have already fulfilled 14 of them. The other 10 don't need to be fulfilled until after the peace treaty or after the rapture of the church goes into place. Now, I want to read you something that he wrote less than a year ago, though. He's very transparent as far as who he is and what his agenda is. He wrote this article March 14, 2012, and it's entitled, "Dangerous to Stick to Outdated Ideas of Sovereignty." Despite the huge sums spent to write down Greece's foreign debt, there has been an outcry against the interference in the country's national sovereignty. True, in exchange for considerable European aid, Greece's ability to maneuver independently will be limited. But are complaints that Greek sovereignty has been severely impaired justified? The idea of a nation's sovereignty is rooted in the 17th century Treaty of Westphalia, which embraced non-interference by external agents in states' domestic affairs as the guiding principle of international relations. But taken to its logical extreme, national sovereignty would require the complete physical and social isolation of states from one another. Indeed, an excessive emphasis on the national sovereignty leads to serious problems. Any international agreement entails a certain transfer of sovereignty. I'm not going to read the whole article, but I'll just hit some of the highlights. For example, when Spain joined the World Trade Organization, it ceded sovereignty by accepting the WTO's rules. Spain accepted this in exchange for being able to trade on equal terms with the rest of the world. So states cooperate because it's advantageous for them to do so, but at the same time, they lose control over certain internal matters. They shift from unilateral to cooperative decision-making. So in other words, they have to work out treaties with other countries. Globalization has made frontiers more porous. We see how one country's policies can have a direct effect on others, and we see such interdependence even more clearly in their economic performance. On a global scale, this complex and interdependent world needs an organization of states and structures of governance oriented towards responsible dialogue, the aim being to mitigate abuses of power and defend global public assets. Without such structure, the world risks a competitive and disorderly race to the bottom among states, together with a protectionist backlash. History has shown that such developments often lead to disastrous conflicts. On the European level, legitimacy is essential, and let's be realistic, won't be achieved unless and until Europeans overcome certain antiquated ideas about sovereignty. Paradoxically, when the crisis struck, the EU was criticized for its lack of integration. Now that it seeks to advance in that direction, the Union is accused of crimping national sovereignty. Citizens must have the feeling that the institutions that govern them account for their interests and make them part of the decision-making process, which implies a union based on rules rather than power. The fact that the EU does not instantly have all the answers to a problem does not mean it has no future. The EU is a new and marvelous experiment, which, as with all experiments, entails a degree of uncertainty. But that should not make us ignore the opportunity cost of a more national conception of sovereignty. The dynamics of interdependence have become well established, so much so they cannot be reversed. To adhere to a narrow Westphalian concept of sovereignty is an unwise anachronism at best and a dangerous gamble at worst. So, just as we look at this, we see a guy who definitely has a global agenda. Now, why do I even bother mentioning this guy? Okay. Well, do I think he's the Antichrist? No. I think he is the best example we have of what the Antichrist might look like, though. One of the things, if you do some research on this online, some of the things that I have found useful is check out the EU's website. Check out, because you hear straight from them what their agenda is. You can check the Brookings Institute, and there's various others. Just start following the trail. Don't listen to what the many whack jobs on the internet have to say about it. Go and see what these organizations have to say about themselves. And I think you'll see some things that are pretty alarming there. Now, why do I bring all this up? Because I believe the stage is being set, and I believe that the time that the Lord will take us out of here is drawing near. That's why I bring this up. Now, there's a lot of problems with the Javier Solana theory. So, in order for him to be it, he has to fulfill 100% of all the prophecies, because the Bible is not inaccurate. There's no such thing as, I got 90%, it must be him. No. But with each prophecy that whoever the Antichrist is fulfills, it will become more and more evident that that's who he is. I think that's why maybe he has gotten so much so much recognition from the Bible-believing Christians. Now, Zechariah chapter 11, verse 17 also adds this: "Woe to the worthless or the idle shepherd who leaves the flock. A sword shall be against his arm and against his right eye. His arm shall completely wither, and his right eye shall be totally blinded." So this is something that must happen to whoever the Antichrist is. So when you look at some of this, say, well, this can't be him yet. He can't be revealed yet. He's not fulfilled all these prophecies, whoever it is. Now, much more important than focusing on who the Antichrist is and spending our time looking at who the Antichrist is, it's much better that we spend our time in the Gospels looking at who Jesus Christ is, and in prayer and doing his work. Because all of these things really aren't going to matter in your life if you're a believer, because you won't be here when all these things take place. But they just might be helpful to leave a little information behind for those who have to live through this. So I guess where I would like to leave this today is with this statement, and that is, don't get hung up on the Antichrist, but get caught up in Jesus Christ. And just love him, focus on him. Don't worry about these things. There's nothing you can do to change it. Scripture is going to happen. It will come to pass. And if you know the Lord, you won't be here. Now, if you don't know the Lord today, if you have not given your life to Jesus Christ, today is a good day to do that, because we believe he could return at any time. And if that's the case, you don't want to be the one that is waiting or standing here and saying, this is what all those crazy Christians were talking about. Father, we just thank you for today.